remember the Liberty protests back in 2004. But I think there's an interaction with a kind of bigger set of forces at this point, and that I suspect is what we're up against.
Great, thank you very much, Lucky, that's great. I remember Tony Blair being against it. I'm old enough to remember when in 1995 he was vehemently arguing against it, and so was Yvette Cooper about a year ago. So everybody was against it until they were not against it anymore. And it's worth actually looking from the labor point of view, we'll discuss it later, but I investigated the situation of the black market economy in all these countries. And interestingly enough, US, that has got no intention of doing a digital ID, has got the smallest black market economy of them all. It's about 5%. And it's because everybody is so petrified of the IRS, which is the tax brigade, that generally people pay taxes and they show up with the right amount of tax in the right places. So they have about half of the average of black economy. We have about 11%, Poland is going to be 11%. Germany, who has got ID cards since Bismarck and now trying to do everything, has got 12.5% of black economy. So it just goes to show these things are entirely unrelated. And anybody who is pushing it in any way forward needs to really consider what would happen. What would happen if we suddenly close the loop on the digital, on the black economy? What would happen to UK if we didn't have this 11% of the black market, and if your kind of safety vent to what's happening at the moment was closed? That would not be good.
Well, is that what the US is finding out now with all of these legislation?
Well, exactly. So, any tightening up. But can I open it to the floor, because I know a lot of you are experts or passionate campaigners for the topic. Maybe we should start from David Davies. What's your take on it? Because you've been tracking it for a long time.
I have a very simple view. I mean, your citation of Peter was inaccurate in only one respect. And that is the idea that there was a single person in the There are thousands of people in Whitehall. The phrase to any young minister that you hear time and again is identity management. Well, I'm afraid I don't want my identity managed, certainly not by Whitehall. It is, as I think David intimated, a bad idea in search of a problem to solve. It's not yet found it. Every single issue that they purport to want to solve, they will fail to solve. It will not stop illegal working. I mean, I can't see a circumstance in which an identity card will bring, or a digital ID, will bring a cannabis farm operator to declare its existence to the IRS or the HMRC. It seems to be thoroughly improbable. It will not stop a single boat. That was just laughable. And I think the one favour is where the Starmer did, was by picking such a stupid reasoning for it. What he did was he flushed out his own ministers to try and give the real reasons for it. And the more I heard the ministers talk, the more uncomfortable I was with the extent of the control over my life that the government seemed to want. And the problem with this is, in my view, is a very subtle one, really. It's that time after time after time, without us knowing, the government will look for uses for this mechanism if it has the mechanism. There used to be a thing, very fashionable actually, in Blair's cabinet office, I think it's still there under, in Cameron's day as well, called the nudge unit.
Oh, yes.
And it was all about changing your behaviour without you knowing they were changing your behaviour. Well, I'm afraid I view that as exquisitely undemocratic. If the government was going to try and incentivise you to do things, it's perfectly within its rights to do that. So long as it tells us it's doing it and gets re-elected after trying to do it once or twice. As I say, I'm very doubtful about any system that allows the de facto centralisation of all the data the government holds on us. And I say de facto because the one login system does that effectively, because it creates a single login. Why that's better than a password manager, I don't know. Maybe Mr. Starmer hasn't discovered a password manager yet. Well, I think I joke, but I think it's quite likely. I think they thought this was going to be hugely popular with the younger half of the population. In fact, it's spectacularly unpopular with the younger half of the population, who know full well that there is intrinsic security in having a dozen different passwords for a dozen different databases, because that means the hacker has got to crack a dozen different problems, not one. And I think the younger half population knew full well what it was about and didn't like it at all. So I'm antagonistic against it, but let me just make one sort of tactical point. Back when Blair started this, I think I was probably the only person on the Tory front bench that didn't like it, right? Michael Howard actually forced a shadow cabinet vote to make me support this for one debate. I made a speech which the Liberal leader called the best speech against ID cards he'd ever heard, except for the last line. I support this policy. But I didn't like it for civil libertarian reasons, for control reasons. I don't want the state to have that control. But that wasn't how we won the argument. What actually happened was 80% of the public were on Blair's side at the beginning. They thought, oh, it's a nice idea, sounds convenient. All the sort of convenience arguments were jotted down, and some of the counter-terrorism ones. Of course, it was never useful for counter-terrorism at all, ever. However, they all got tried out. But what transformed the debate was the state losing 2 CDs with, I think, 26 million records on them, tax records, welfare records, and the like. And the state suddenly, and the public at large suddenly realised there was actually a risk to the state holding all this data in one place. And I think the same thing will happen again. I think that one of the reasons we've seen this rapid antagonism to this policy, other than the fact that Starmer himself announced it, his normal latest touch with these things, I think is that people are aware that every single major tech company in California has lost hundreds of millions of records. Not one or two, hundreds of millions of records. Now, if they, with their highly paid, brilliant cryptographers and brilliant software engineers can't protect what for them is a very valuable asset, what chance an underpaid civil servant in the Department of Technology? What chance? Zero. Absolutely zero. But of course, in our case, it's our tax records, it's our welfare records. Now the government has access to our bank accounts, it may even be our financial records. Of course, it's our health records, and in some respects, it may even be our movement records because things like passports and driving licenses tied into it. And people realise they do not want this to be the subject of a ransomware attack or some other sort of attack, or even a foreign state attack. So I think this thing will crash and burn. And the last point on this, sorry I'm rambling, but the last point on this is that the way they've started down this route will guarantee it crashes and burns. The one login software was written on insecure machines by Romanian programmers in Romania. So it was intrinsically insecure from day one. When the phrase, what the name they call themselves, the information assurance team looked at this back in 2022, they said this is a disaster in the making. So what happened? The department dissolved the information assurance team. You get rid of it because they thought it was blocking progress. Then earlier this year, I think, they did a red team exercise on this, and the red team exercise penetrated the one login system without the one login operators knowing about it, and they could perfectly well plant in malware if they so choose to do. Now, if that's the standard that we're dealing with, this thing, even if it launches or crash and burn, it'll make the Post Office Horizon project look like an act of genius. So that's why I never looked at it. Sorry, rather wrong with it.
past. And I think you're exactly right that they haven't. And you know, had they come up with this 12 years ago, I think it might have gained some traction. But the problem now is we've been through Edward Snowden. The younger generation are all very aware of what can happen with their privacy because it's happened to them. You know, when you talk about cyberbullying in school, it is educational, even if it's awful. You know, you learn about what it means to have your data stolen and copied. And I think actually other people are more aware.
People don't remember, Edward Snowden highlighted lots of things, but he highlighted one thing, and that was that every single British citizen's Google account was duplicated in Dublin every day for backup purposes, and that duplication was handed over to the NSA by the GCHQ. You know, every single item of your Google account, of searches and the rest of it. And people now do realise that.
Yeah.
But it goes further, which we will debate in a minute, but our state of national cybersecurity has deteriorated quite severely over the period of Ukraine war, because there is a lot more people interested and they are much better equipped than anybody has ever been. And over last weekend, MOD was hacked again. RAF list of log flights with the names of pilots and God knows what else. So if GCHQ cannot protect RAF logs, it's...
Ukraine's a rather interesting example because the National Bank of Ukraine actually said what it is a very interesting thing to reflect on. I know this is a bit tangential, but in the UK, it's earlier, you see this thing on the, you know, Barclays was down for like 3 or 4 days and people couldn't pay their because it went down at the end of January. And then Lloyds Bank was down for a few days for some, I can't remember why, for some reason or
I
other.
believe that one login was actually down yesterday because of the AWS outage.
Probably. Meanwhile, in Ukraine, where people are dropping bombs on the banking system, the settlement system hasn't been down for a second since the Russian invasion. And the POS network is up 98.5% of the time. And the National Bank, I have a quote, I can't look it up, but I have the quote. But the National Bank of Ukraine said one of the reasons they've been able to maintain services is because they have a digital identity system. So when you walk into a bank branch, because your bank's been blown up, and you walk into another bank branch because you need to get some money, it works because you have a digital identity. You know, I think Ukraine does an interesting example around that. Just the point about the database, I agree with you about that, but I couldn't actually tell you whether they're proposing to build a database or not, because the current state of the, I mean, even calling it a proposal is a notion, let's call it the digital identity notion. No one has the slightest idea of what they're actually proposing and how it's going to work. And now I think the situation we have in place right now, which, you know, broadly speaking, I need to demonstrate the right to work, or I need to demonstrate that I'm renting this house, or I need to demonstrate whatever it is.
Well, I'm slightly offended by even the idea that I need to demonstrate the right to work.
Well,
why do I need to ask the government permission to work?
Well,
You wouldn't have to.
Between UK and everywhere else, you know, I'm from Central Europe, where it's very much papers, please.
Yeah.
So those of you who played the game and, you know, introduced me to that, that's what your day is. The police can have the right at any point to ask who are you and what are you doing here.
Well, even
Which in UK has never been the case.
I think
People only are asked if it's something wrong. And this is very fundamental difference. And we are on the route to something which we don't really want to be following. It's a philosophical change, very fundamental, about your right to walk on the street versus none. And people here seem to be sleepwalking again into a major
I'm not
loss
making
of
a comment
property.
on the political.
No, I know, but it needs to be said.
If you're required to demonstrate, I mean, whether people should have to provide a right to work or not is not the point. The point is, when you need to demonstrate something, broadly speaking, as in the Apple example I gave, the solution should be that you go and do whatever it is you need to do to show the NHS or the Department or whatever. It gets downloaded to your phone as a cryptographically secured credential. And what you present is the cryptographically secured credential, not the ID card. So, you know, metaphorically, yes, you have a digital identity on your phone. It's not a digital identity card. There is no database sitting behind it. You know, I don't think it's a key. Actually, I don't think anyone would be in favour of building that database. I'm not sure that's true.
Shall we go back to the audience? There is a couple of questions there.
Hi, good evening. How much is being done in conjunction with other countries? Because I had heard that it was being based on the American digital ID plans and that they were.
It's based on Estonians, but Estonians know nothing about
You know,
it.
Based on is a, you
We
know,
don't know that. I mean,
That is
what we
being
do know
taxed
is
in
that
the
Keir
British.
Keir Starmer went off to look at iPod to see if he wanted to copy India.
which is why they have such massive identity fraud all the time.
Yes.
Because
It's a mess.
Okay,
it's
John.
not the solution.
I've just been reading the digital ID scheme explainer. I mean, this seems like nonsensical, doesn't it? It's not solving any real problems that you can't do without a passport. What's the big deal? It says, 10% of people don't have a passport. But that means 90% have had a passport. And it just seems to me it's political, because this stuff about right to work, etc., refusal to work stuff, is nonsense, because most people, if you want to employ someone illegally, don't employ them legally, they'll pay them cash, if we still have cash.
So I think this is kind of a fundamental thing, is that laws are for the law and not for criminals. Right? Because if this is lawfully in place and your right to work is determined by you proving it, well, guess what? The unlawful are not going to bother. They're not going to engage with that.
That's why I'm saying you should mandate, if you want to do something about it, you need to mandate that the employers check it. It doesn't matter
We
whether
already
it's.
have one.
But the big shot here is unlawful employers.
Exactly. So tackle that.
John.
I'd just like to say a few points. The Prime Minister mentioned this identity credential. We use Estonia as a yardstick. The population of Estonia is 1.3 million. The population of Birmingham is 1.2 million. So the scale of this undertaking is quite extraordinary if he really thinks he can deal with it. The other point I really want to make is that this is a common law-based country. And as you already alluded to earlier on, we can do whatever we want, providing it's not illegal, rather than doing only what is legal, which is written into much continental law. And I haven't heard the word liability or law mentioned in this conversation so far. We've dived into technology, and by and large I agree with Dave, except I think it should all be private sector and none of it government, or very little of it government, including infrastructure. But the key thing on all of this is liability. What happens, who's on the hook for what and when it goes wrong?
So you said about using passports to. Well, the thing is, that's not actually a solution. That's superficial. If or like my kids did, when they wanted to go to the pub to prove their identity, they had to show their passport, but they're showing it to someone who can't tell whether it's a real passport or not. It's pointless. It doesn't actually fix the problem. So saying people should use driving license or passports, unless you can check it, unless you can actually verify it, what's the point? And that's, so it's not a very solution.
If you go to a nightclub, they have scanners. They scan, my friend's company does that. You just scan your passport and they scan your driving license.
That only takes a copy. It doesn't actually
It doesn't.
verify it.
It's
just
not
takes
very.
a copy of it. That's
I
it.
agree. It's just taking a
So
copy.
is there a big problem with people, underage people going to nightclubs? I think that's,
But the thing is, actually, the biggest problem in London isn't underage people getting to nightclubs. It's all the lost passports and driving licenses then used by illegal immigrants to get.
I think we're back to the same thing again.
But I just wanted to make one other. I think people kind of passed over your point slightly. I don't think the point was made strongly enough, which is that when we're talking about digital identity and digital money working together, and by the way, I'm a big supporter of digital money. I think we should make the economy more efficient. But the point about the dollarization of this, because we don't in the UK as of yet have an actual policy about any of this. If you find it, a younger generation just find it easier to transact online because they happen to have digital dollars stored on their phones and they can't do it with pounds, they'll just use dollars. And they won't think anything of that, but of course at a macro level that does impact monetary policy and what we can do. So, actually I should also say, it's a fantastic British invention as well, I should say English invention, because stable coins were invented in England in 1787, at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, when the transition from a pre-industrial to an industrial economy meant that there was no money, there was no circulating medium of exchange to pay money wages, or for retailers to get payment to sell things. So the Elon Musks of the day, Matthew Bolton and so on, stepped in and produced what we call tokens, the copper equivalents, which circulated at par. You know, so we actually created, and they were called druids actually, because a lot of the copper came from Wales. So we invented stable coins, and they helped the industrial economy to grow. And then downstream, once the technology improved, the Bank of England outlawed the production of private money, and the Mint stepped in and took over the production. And I actually think the same thing might happen here. So this was another great English invention. Stable
So there
coins.
were a couple of other questions.
Yeah, so Adrian from One ID, so we're kind of bank and telco based digital identity provider. I've been working with the last government and this government through DCMS and DCIT when it was set up. So for 5 years we've been trying to advise government on what works for citizens and businesses and what doesn't work, trying to help write the rules. And I believe in the model where the government governs and then the private sector can deliver solutions. So we're certified for UK government rules to UK government standards by the UK government auditors. All of that has security and risk control and all that kind of stuff, the good practice for the private sector. And all of that's kind of disappeared with the announcements this year. So the government's trying to insert itself in all the transactions, so we enable safe peer-to-peer transactions, business-to-business transactions, person-to-business transactions, none of which need the government today, and they all work perfectly well today. The new proposals are trying to insert government in the middle of all those things, which you lose security, you lose privacy, and it costs a lot of money, and I can't see the point in any of those things.
No, I mean, I agree. I think it is kind of a little pointless, but...
I have a comment and a question. So we don't really talk about the fact that this is all being brought in to, I guess, stop illegal workers and stop immigrants. The reason I'm using air quotes is no one is really illegal anywhere. We're all citizens of this world. But secondly, I came here when I was 18 to study before Brexit, so I was legally here as a European citizen. And I applied for every restaurant job I could find around me because I only have £200 in my bank account, which I opened by lying to the bank that I was babysitting for my friend because I couldn't get a bank account without a job, which I couldn't get without a bank account, which I couldn't get without a national insurance number. So that was my first bit of fraud.
How did you get a national insurance number?
By getting the bank account that I lied about having a job for. Because that proved that I was a human in my own right and existing in the UK. But then every job I went and applied to that I got an interview for offered me a cash in hand job. I was perfectly happy paying my taxes and I have been a tax-paying citizen for the last 13 years. But the problem isn't that people are coming here and taking on jobs. They're only taking those jobs because those are the jobs that are being offered to them. Employers are choosing to not pay taxes on their employees, to not pay into pension schemes, and to not be signed up to health and safety compliance so they don't have to declare anything. So they can sponge off workers that just want to work hard and bring in money into their families, and young people that move here for a better life. So we're not really addressing the core issue with a digital ID because companies are still gonna commit fraud and illegally employ people, whether there's a digital ID or not. And secondly, how do I explain to my 85-year-old grandma that she has to buy a £2,000 iPhone and ditch her extra large flip phone because she can't see, just so she can go to the pharmacy and get the same prescription she's been getting for the last 10 years? It doesn't take into account the full population, and it doesn't talk or solve the core problem, which is businesses are choosing to not support the British economy.
But David's absolutely right. I hope I made Brit.
This is the other
Because
thing.
that's it, identity.
So we've got another 5 minutes left. So
And this was the other thing that Peter Lilly said, was that unlike every other thing that came before the cabinet, everything else would be, we have this problem, what's the best way to solve it? But ID cards, it was always, what would you do if you had one? You know, and it's very much, you know, I'm not saying that you're wrong, I'm just saying that this government has formed, or the British governments in general have formed in wanting identification and trying to figure out a justification for it. or a problem that
You're right.
The other issue about government having forms is what they do with the information. My objection is not to identity card. I actually said when we were fighting over this, we can have an identity card, I just don't want the state to provide it. Have a solicitor provide it, have a bank provide it, whatever. So it's a common agreed form, and do that. The issue for me was always about centralisation of data. Because the state always misuses data. I really don't think after what we went through with COVID and the government's behaviour with COVID, I need to explain it. The state will send up a drone to watch you walk your dog. Or tell me I can't go somewhere without a vaccine passport. It's meaningless anyway. It's the use of data. And every state, I don't care how nice they are, how good they are, will, when they're under pressure, misuse your data. And that, for me, is what this is, the fundamental is about.
Hi there. I have a question. If digital ID makes trust abundant and automated, then what replaces scarcity as a sort of value?
I actually wrote a book about that.
Yeah.
So the answer is reputation. So the thing is, if you can't gain identity, I'll take a very simple example, which is you're on the review side, you're looking at reviews of local plumbers. Okay. Now at the moment, you look at those reviews and are they real, or did the plumber log in and do them? Now imagine with a digital identity system that you can't gain that anymore. Okay. So now you know that those reviews are real. That way, the reputation attached to a plumber becomes an extremely valuable economic thing. And actually losing that reputation will become a serious
Is
punishment.
that actually how people find plumbers? I just asked a friend who they used.
You're good friends.
So if you have a situation where reputation becomes ungainable, it becomes actually running an economy where those things are real is vastly more efficient for all sorts of reasons. You know?
So the most recent example, which is the age verification, use of VPNs has gone up 1,400% since the legislation was brought in. It's proved to be completely ineffectual in doing anything that was aiming to do. I'll use that as an example. Not only that, but the government having control of data. I would challenge anyone to tell me when the government has actually managed to keep data secure in any way, shape or form. That very same system, the age verification system, hacked on Discord within 6 months of coming in.
Because he's not probably the answer to it. Yeah.
Perhaps answer that. So we do digital right to work checks today. The Home Office sets the rules for digital right to work check and what we need to do. And they say we've got to scan a passport. It's got to be a British or Irish passport or an Irish ID card, and we've got to send a picture of the document to the employer. Or right to rent, we've got to send a picture of the document to the landlord. I've said to the Home Office, this is crazy.
I know they're mandating identity.
Every employee and landlord in the country will be storing those digital images on a Windows PC under someone's desk, and then it gets hacked and they're online.
If you want to know, is this person, for example, between 13 and 18, they want to take part in an online discussion which is for people between 13 and 18. You should be able to ask on behalf of your trip, is this person between 13 and 18? You shouldn't be able to ask, what's their name, what's their address, any other personal identifiable information. A digital identity system, a digital identity infrastructure should work for people. I'm completely on that page.
The question is, is the UK capable of building it?
The UK has built it.
Okay, but the question, can I just say, John has arrived after his long sentencing, so would you like to join us?
No, not really. I think
Good enough for today. But
sink into the background.
John has initiated the review today. Right, we will be moving a few more questions and we're wrapping up. Okay, Richard?
So you've got a lot of thinking of the sort of classical offline, so not cards, something digital. We've got zero knowledge proof ability, so the idea that you can share your data, the fact that you are X, that you are of an age from a certain country, without sharing your details. It seems like this whole proposal ignores that kind of thing, where we need this sort of old-fashioned identity where you prove you are something to show. Is somebody made a coherent proposal along the lines of solving the things you want to solve, at the same time dealing with the problems of a government overreach like China, where you have the old-fashioned sort of digital or personal identity card. That's really where we're trying to get to with the solution. And zero knowledge proof, of course, is only one aspect of the whole technological and technical solutions.
No, I completely agree with you. We have tools that we didn't have. So zero knowledge proofs, cryptographic binding, homomorphic encryption, all of these things we can deploy to provide both privacy and security. My view on it is talking about zero knowledge proofs to people who don't know how a photocopier works is a bit of a dead end. So that's why I thought I'd use Doctor Who instead as the example.
Richard.
I think one thing, it's interesting a lot of people trust the private sector, because what we're talking about here often is the Silicon Valley tech crowd.
Yeah.
And this country is already massively over-dependent on American platforms, American cloud computing, American social media. And so everyone's talking about is if it's just a problem of Britain, or as I noticed, England. And so, and I think James was pointing this out, what's happening here is that we're being constructed around these technologies. And if we're talking about this, surely we should be talking about, like, dare we say in this post-Brexit one, a European solution that is not owned in Silicon Valley. We just saw the Amazon cloud system go down. We're missing this wider picture of how the world is being digitally reorganised. Because we talked about, we've talked about digital money, but there's also, are we going to be basically forced into a digital yuan, a digital dollar, maybe through stable coins or whatever?
Which is it appears to me to be quite likely, which is that a stable coin could work online quite neatly, and people would just start to use that instead. And there's a major part, like, what does the government do? And how does the government operate over the last 150 years or so? A major part of what it wants to do is monetary policy and to set how banks operate and how people use the money. And that money is there, and you control the conditions as best you can. You set interest rates, and that's a major lever for control. What happens if you don't have an economy that works like that? If you're, for instance, Argentina, where like half the population is using dollars for perfectly good reasons, because not using peso, and suddenly this is a huge and continually going wrong, and you've severely lost a major part of what it means to have a sovereign country in any sense, right? You don't have that control. On the basis of how a monetary system operates, you've lost that control entirely. That seems to me that's something that could easily happen. And also we are being leaned in this direction. You can see a large chunk of what's happened post-Brexit in particular is in fact taking us towards that sort of relationship with Washington over the next 10, 15 years or so.
But that's probably more of an impact of geopolitics, and we have to lean to people
This is
who
an
have
important point, because Mike Novogratz, who runs Galaxy Digital, one of the big, he's very popular with young people that John hangs around with at these Web3 things. He said, quite accurately a couple of weeks ago, he said, you have to remember the majority of stablecoin users are actually going to be AIs, not people. So because all of this stuff is quite boring to people, it is, actually, they're not going to be making those decisions about what to use, because it's going to be AIs that are doing it. The average person, I include myself in that, trying to persuade me next year to sit down and try and work out which ISA to use, instead of just asking ChatGPT which is the best ISA, is going to be a hill to climb, because choosing a savings account is just not interesting to people, and I don't trust myself to make a better job of it than even the most rudimentary AI. So one thing that I think I want to make, I don't think we're being alarmist, because I think actually this is going to escalate, and it's because it won't be people that are making these choices, it will be their AI agents that are doing it. And if it turns out the easiest way for AI agents to shift value, which it will be, by the way, is to use stable coins. That will accelerate the use of stable coins.
Yes, I just wanted to ask how the digital ID sits in the context of the tech prosperity deal that the Donald Trump-led consortium of tech bros has announced. I believe it was $131 billion investment in the UK over the next couple of years. And I also believe that the energy consumption or the energy production of the UK grid should have been tripled to reach these goals. So quite utopian goals, all in the context of sovereign AI. So I wanted to know if you guys could talk a little bit more about that. And to me, it looks that the digital ID is just a fringe topic in a much wider discussion. AI in the service of the people.
I think we can ask.
So pick up on the investment in infrastructure points and whatever we're talking about now. Advertising is paying for it all. Google have been doing predictive analytics for the last 10 years, and 90% of their profit is made from illegally obtained personal information. I deliberately avoid Google, and they still know more about me than my government does. You know, the investment in the infrastructure, not just in the UK but globally, is coming out from three main West Coast US companies. Not governments, not telcos, not, and they're paying the money, but they own us. You know, it's not a question of why they're owning us. Nobody else has paid for it. Nobody else invests in it.
I think the
we can't blame other people.
I think the problem also is that by the decision to move to the cloud, that decision ended up moving to American cloud predominantly. So we have lost a lot of skill in the UK, which was here with the data centers initially.
I used to work
by
in the
UK
mid-90s. I worked on the
and
government.
we don't have that skill anymore. I agree. Ben, you had a question.
Hi, yeah, no, I really think there is an opportunity, and I see the big AI problems and the big scope issues and how scary it is, but we have the ability and the capability to provide the citizen first digital ID for library card, digital ID for simple services, exactly in the cryptographic key, simple fact, zero knowledge examples. And I think we have to put foothold there for simple, provable, usable, useful tools built with that cryptographic capability. Partly it'll help explain to people what the bloody toolkit is and what it does. So try not to solve and try to avoid and keep out of the way of these big political we'll sort immigration problems, we'll solve AI, and get some good foothold in here's how UK does digital well, because we can build things that work. I looked at what we did with the .gov sites, which were great and did something well. And then of course, it was all about it. So I think all we should ever do is just write the spec and not anymore, but that's doable.
I'll give you a very simple example to back that up, a very quick example. So I have a Woking FC season ticket.
Right.
And, a couple of times a year I would go to the game without my season ticket because it was in the other jacket. Last year they started doing it on your phone, so you can download your season ticket on your phone. So now every time I go to the game I have my season ticket. It's simple stuff like that.
Yes.
I know, I agree.
If we want a decade of national renewal, why on earth don't we want availability and access
Well,
to
to do that,
national
we have to get
sector?
everybody off Facebook, which is a bit of a mountain to climb.
It's doable, it's doable. I think we need
Right,
to
we're going for national renewal. You heard it here first. Last question, then we bring it to.
So I don't think we're a UK company. We're providing jobs for UK people. We're providing economic growth, which is meant to be mission number one for the government. And what the government is trying to do is undermining what we're doing and trying to replace that with Tony Blair's vision. It's funded by Larry Ellison.
I would like to get a few closing words from the panel.
Well, I guess the one thing is the history of ID card proposals or identification, whatever you want to call it, has been the people support the goals, but generally not the details once they're announced. So we will see if this follows the same pattern.
I think going without a digital identity infrastructure is not a viable strategy. I think we'd all love to live in rural Poland where everybody knows everybody else and everyone knows who's a veteran and who isn't. But I don't think that's really the way forward. So I think, as several of you made the points earlier on, we don't need a digital identity card, we don't need the card. The government already solved the problem last year. They created the digital identity and attributes trust framework.
Are we sure Keir Starmer knows?
They already solved the problem. This is a distraction.
I mean, this is not a joke. There is an office for digital identity and attributes. People actually work there. It's like Minister of Funny Walk.
I sat in on I was part of one of the focus groups for the framework you're talking about.
I was actually on the Home Office, they called it the Home Office Advisory Group, which actually we should have done them under the Trade Subscriptions Act. They never paid the slightest attention to any given
Can I move it to James?
I suppose the only thing I pick up on is something you mentioned yourself, which is that this hidden economy, this layer of people with like a whole load of economic process, the shadow economy, is far bigger than it was in most developed countries. And I don't know the figures for the US, but certainly in Britain, you're talking a doubling the size over the last 10 years or so, about 5% of GDP, it's just over 10% now. Same in Germany, same.
Or perhaps you should suggest to Rachel Reeves that prostitution and drug dealing are a better option.
Or a growth industry. It's the issue here is that you're moving from like, oh, this is a marginal thing that's squeezed out, into like, this is quite a fundamental part of what's going on. So if you're saying we have to get rid of this, we're going to try and snap down, you are doing some potentially serious economic damage to the economy we actually live in, which is, you know, 1 in 10 pounds out there is in fact a long way from HMRC and doing government as well.
1 house 20 apparently. Right, on that note, I would like to thank our lovely speakers, and we got the House of Commons chocolate. Thank you very much for your preparation.
Is it chocolate or just chocolate flavoured?
Oh.
And
thank you very much for your fantastic questions. We've recorded and shared.